Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this event. This is the launch event for the Comma Press ebook, Strange Abrasions. So just to explain this a little bit, basically, the ebook has come about through the Comma Press short story courses. If you don't know, Comma Press are a short story publishers in Manchester. They have been going for a number of years, publishing all sorts of short stories of all different kinds, including, just let in a latecomer, including genre short stories and horror short stories particularly. So for the last few years, Comma have been doing short story courses. Obviously, in the first instance, they were doing them online, doing them in person, and then, as with everything else in the last couple of years, that kind of went slightly pear-shaped. So they moved to doing it online. And so last year, I was approached by Comma. I should introduce myself. My name's Andy Murray. I'm not the tennis guy. I'm sorry, nothing I can do about it. I am a writer based in journalist based in Manchester, and I've done quite a few things with Comma over the years. So last year, Comma asked me to host an online short story course, particularly an online horror short story course. And I think one of the advantages, sort of unexpected advantages of doing the short story courses this way, doing them online rather than in person, doing them via Zoom, is that it's meant all kinds of people from all kinds of places can get involved. So rather than, as they've done in the past, having a Newcastle short story course or so on, everybody from anywhere in the world can join in on the one course. And that is actually what's happened. We've had people from all over the world joining in on the same course, which kind of makes for quite an interesting experience. So the courses are 2 hours sessions, twice every fortnight, 6 sessions in total. And the nature of the sessions is that for the first hour, we'll discuss a story. I'll have sort of set a story beforehand that we'll discuss. And then for the second hour, it'll be more of a writing exercise, a kind of guided writing exercise with story prompts. So out of that, we get stories, and at the end of every course, Comma do an ebook, which they publish online. So the ebook is basically what the participants have done. In no way obliged to participate in the ebook, but it generally is a good take up for it. And in this particular instance, it went down very well. I think we had a very interesting result. And Strange Abrasions is that book. So there are 13 stories in the book. I think we were all pretty pleased when we realised it was 13, just for that extra spooky hit. And it's got a cover, specially designed by Ben Talon, who is here tonight. He's actually one of the participants in the course as well. So he's on the cover and in the book, as we will see. So what I want to do tonight is I want to go through the individual writers, most of whom are here. I think we've got 3 who can't make it. So they're all going to either introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their story, or they're going to introduce themselves and read an excerpt of their story. So I thought we would do that in the order of the stories in the book. The book, I should say, plug away. It's 99p. It's available now from eBay and from Comma's website. Just 99p. Can't say fairer than that. It came out about 3 days before Halloween, which again was kind of quite nice in terms of timing. So our first writer tonight is Fia Harrington. Fia, are you there?
I am.
Okay.
Hello.
So, and Fia, I should say, and you will forgive me, I hope, because at no point during the course have I done this, but come on, you did a short story course about horror, and your name's Fia. This was meant to be, wasn't it?
What can I say?
And you're the first one up tonight. Okay, so do you want to introduce yourself and introduce your story, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Fia Harrington. My story is called A Story for the Sea, and it's a folk horror story set on a fictional remote island where the community every few years has a big fishing trip, and this is the young child in the story's first big fishing trip. So shall I go ahead and read?
Yes, please.
Okay. Cool. This is a story for the sea, not about the sea, but for the sea. Our people have a great tradition of storytelling, and so each week, since you could grasp an oar in your little hands, we have rowed together to the edge of the reef that encircles our island like a halo, and we have told the sea a story for our supper. The sea is vast and mighty, but she lacks language to tell the stories she hungers for, so we must feed her. Are you ready, little one? You beam and nod, proudly showing me your feet, clad in the traditional fish skin leather our people have worn since time before memory. The bright red of the skin has faded to the maroon of dried blood through generations of wear, but they are sturdy and flexible, perfect for days at sea. The wind picks up and flings open your sealskin, catching you off guard. Wrap up warm, little one, I say, crouching down to meet your gaze. This north wind will freeze your nose clean off. I pinch your already red and running nose between finger and thumb, pretending to keep it in my hand as you giggle. You'll need that nose of yours. I screw it back on. For what good is a young fisher who cannot smell oncoming rain, or the sharpness of a turning tide? Now, say goodbye to your mother and father. You turn eagerly to hug them. Your mother's hands are knotted tight as the net she holds, her knuckles white like the cuttlefish bones that litter our shores after a storm. She does not look at you as you embrace her hips. Your father kisses the top of your head, and your grandmother and the rest of our village wave and smile brightly behind them, excited for your big day. I pull lightly at your arm. It is time. I grasp the stern of our boat, my hands similarly weathered from a life spent at sea. You clamber in and plonk onto your customary seat at the bow. I do a final check. The nets are folded perfectly into piles like swaddled babes, prepared the night before by the elders. The talismans your parents carved hang from the bow and stern. Everyone has played their part, and we are ready. The boat grinds a path through the pebbles, nosing into the water as I jump in. You wave at your parents back on the shore. They will wait at the water's edge with the rest of the village, ready with their nets to catch what we miss. Everyone waves and cheers as the tide rushes to greet us, and we are carried away from the shore. Look, little one, I say, steering with my oar between the rocks. Our people are proud. No other fisher so young has ventured out on the open water. But then we knew you would be different, and so did the sea.
Thank you, Fia. Sounds like such a nice story, nothing, and just for just 99p, you can find out what happens next. That's brilliant. Thanks very much. I should say, by the way, so we're going to have readings and introductions, and then the second half of the hour that we've got, we're going to have a bit of Q&A. So if you do have any questions about any of the particular stories or just generally, and do sort of bear them in mind, and we'll come to that later on. So yes, thank you, Fia. And yeah, Ben Talon is next up. Aforementioned Ben Talon. So yeah, do you want to tell us a bit about your story, Ben?
Sure, yeah. It's called A Wolf in Sports Clothing. And it's a different kind of werewolf story. And it was kind of written in response to studying Angela Carter's Wolf Alice. So off the back of that, I went and read a collection of that work and found The Werewolf. And in particular, that story really gripped me with its such a kind of powerful, punchy narrative, and the prose was beautiful. But something that stood out to me was the setting, and it was the kind of gothic horror story. And you think of chapels and full moons, and I guess this, in response, I wanted to play with that idea and take it to a very banal contemporary setting. And I wanted to see what would happen with the idea of a kid from a council estate being a werewolf. So that's kind of the angle on this story, and I had a great fun writing it, and I guess it was also just looking at that idea that there's magic wherever you are at any given time. I think sometimes we have a tendency to look at seek fantasy in other worlds and or forgotten worlds, that kind of idea, and it was the idea that it's all around us at any time. So here's a short excerpt. When a severed hand is found in the socks basket at Sports Direct, nobody speaks of wild things. Here's a customer looking for shin pads who finds it when she is distracted by the 3 for 2 offer on thick socks. She carefully places the hand down on the counter, its fingers frozen in a dead spider arch, as if reaching for something unseen. Wide-eyed, in a state of shock, she tells the serving store manager that she will not need a bag for it. The police close the store and take the customer away under a foil blanket for questioning and inevitable counselling. The seaside town is post-industrial, tired, cynical, and overcast. Police tape flaps and snaps in the rain, holding off pockets of insistent local reporters and curious teenagers with hands down the fronts of their trousers. They come in droves, hurrying out of promenade amusement arcades and fried chicken shops when they learn of the fresh crime scene. Claws and fangs will not cross a single one of these young minds. It has been a long time since anyone feared the devil's work. His greatest trick, after all, was convincing the world it didn't exist. In Danny Atherton's world, magic can only be accessed with a Disney Plus subscription. Adventure is downloaded onto gaming consoles. His battered Nike shoes, grey tracksuit, and chimp-like gait fill his neighbours with dread. "You must be dealing with that car," they whisper, peeking out of the curtains, watching as he burns rubber and rolls away into the night. They call him feral, but remain oblivious to the accuracy of their insult. None have seen the insipid green glow in his eyes, reflected only by moonlight. Sports Direct Assistant Manager John Dalton spends his waking hours in the shadow of his sinister 0 hours contract. In his rundown bedsit, he lays awake at night, thinking of terrifying scenarios it leaves him exposed to, the liberties it steals. Something triggers the store alarm in the small hours, and so, still wide awake, he volunteers to drive down and investigate. Expecting an electrical fault, he is shocked to find the fire escape torn completely off its hinges and several meters away from the building. The CCTV camera has been ripped from the wall. His friend, an employee, Danny Atherton, lies unconscious on a mess of McDonald's salad leaves, gherkins, burger buns, and ketchup in the corridor. A lot of ketchup, John tells himself, despite the absence of little plastic condiment pots. When he discovers that Danny's hand is missing, he vomits. He does not report the troubling findings to his manager, Upper Tracy. To do so would invite the possibility of full unemployment and missed child maintenance payments. Unable to wake Danny, he is relieved to detect a faint pulse and quiet breathing. Putting his first aid training to use, he cleans and bandages the stump. Satisfied he has stemmed the flow of blood, John lifts Danny's chin and peels back his eyelids. They are bloodshot, the pupils tiny, unseeing and animalistic. After that, he checks the security footage but finds no evidence of any incidents at the store which might explain the grisly scene. The hulking, fast-moving shadow which flashes across the camera fills him with nameless dread, but the footage abruptly ends shortly after. So John puts it out of his thoughts. He wonders if what has happened to Danny could be linked to the recent disappearance of two local people. With Danny's limp body laid across the back seat of John's car, he shuns the idea of taking him to the hospital and sets off for his family home instead. There, he rings the doorbell, but panics before anyone arrives to open it and runs away, leaving him on the doorstep, praying someone will find him soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben. Okay, so up next, Susan Earlham. Susan, not for the first time tonight, you can pronounce the title of your story, save me making a hash of it.
Hi there. My story is called Exuviae. I'm not going to be reading it from it tonight because we'd be here all night if we were all reading. But it's to do with multifaceted personalities and the different sort of, for want of a better word, the different skins that we all put on under different circumstances. We behave differently with different people. I wrote this one on the last session, which we tried to avoid writing about the pandemic through the whole course, but in the last session we were all kind of given free rein. So we all kind of wrote about the horrors of what the pandemic might be and what it could be. Yeah, so...
There we go. Thank you, Susan. We will come back to some more reading slightly later on. Eleanor Kappa, I know you have some accessibility issues in terms of Wi-Fi. Are you with us? Are you there? Hello, Eleanor. If not, I can introduce you in your absence. Okay, I'll go for that. So Eleanor Capper, a story was called The Last Train, which was about a couple who have a mysterious experience when the husband gets the last train home and tells his wife about it. She doesn't quite believe him and goes to investigate, and they both wish that they hadn't. So after that, again, can't make it tonight, unfortunately, but Andrew Lyle. Andrew's story was called Upon Returning Home from the Great War, again set just after the Great War. So a soldier returns home to his small village and finds that a strange kind of festival that he isn't familiar with is happening, and by he realizes what that's about. Next story is by Melissa Elborn. Are you there, Melissa? I think you are.
I'm here.
Hello. Do you want to introduce your story?
Yeah, hello everybody. My story is called The Third Lamppost. It's inspired by the week where we covered Aikman's story called The Hospice, based on a prompt from Andy. So it's about a man walking home from work very late at night when strange things start to happen. It's hard to say sort of more than that, really. It's a very short story. I think if I say any more, I'll sort of give it away, really. But yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So yeah, and again, she can't make it tonight, but Rachel Smith's story was called The Stopover, about a woman who experiences problems with sleepwalking. So she goes to, or she's going to see a psychiatrist, stays over in a hotel on the way there, and again, things happen. We're not giving much away, are we? But that's the point, basically, isn't it? We're just leading you towards these things. Finally, Courtney Button, last of the three people who can't make it tonight, unfortunately. Courtney's story was called Crystallized, about a man who fashions really detailed and intricate figures from stories that are inside his head, but that's not exactly what's happening. You won't be surprised to hear that some of these stories about things not quite being what they appeared to be in the first place. But we do have tonight with us Libby Harris. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my story is called Lepidopterophobia, which is the fear of moths, and it's about a girl with an extreme fear being put into a situation where she has to face them, and doesn't go as hoped.
Fantastic, thank you. The next story is by Paul Childs. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself in the story?
Hey there. Yep, I'm Paul. I wrote my story. It's called Jasper. I wrote this week 6. As Susan said, we were trying to draw inspiration from real life, but stay away from the pandemic. Using the Robert Shearman's The Big Boys box of big box of tricks, which just starts normal and goes really weird. And so I took a real story, something that really happened to me, and just sort of transcribed what happened for real. And then when I went back through it, I really exaggerated it and everything goes a bit crazy, but I'm going to read for you an excerpt coming after Libby's story as well. This makes it kind of a really sort of insecty section of the book, as you'll find out. So where I come from, we call wasps jaspers. I've no idea why. It's an old East Anglia thing, apparently. When I was a kid, if one flew into the classroom, it wouldn't be long before someone thrust their hand up and yelled, "Mr. Greenall, Jasper's in here. Can I open the window and let him out?" Now, I suffer from sphexophobia, fear of wasps, not bees, not any other kind of airborne insect, just an irrational aversion to Vespula vulgaris, the common wasp. I wasn't always scared of them, but I can pinpoint the exact time when this phobia developed. 7-year-old me would carelessly bat wasps away with the back of my hand, but my dad always said, "Stop that. If you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone." Important advice, but looking back, how I wish I hadn't listened to it. Things would be quite different now. So one day at school, I was playing with Jason and Simon, when the bell rang, signaling playtime is over. Stop what you're doing, stand still, and wait quietly for your class to be called in. So I froze in place, even though I was being chased by a rather large wasp. That's okay, I thought, as Miss Spencer ushered in blue class. If I leave it alone, it'll leave me alone. My dad said so. It was hovering a little too near my head for my liking. Usually I'd have batted it away before letting it get this close. Green class, called Mrs. Spencer. Hurry up, I whispered under my breath, willing the teacher to call in the red class. Purple class. I'm pretty sure she wasn't doing it on purpose, but at the time, it felt like it. Rainbow class, rainbow class, rainbow class. It's not even a colour. The wasp continued to investigate me, but deep down I knew that if I left it alone, it would leave me alone. My dad said so. It was just as the yellow class were called in that our stripy friend made a very gentle landing on my right cheek. Go away, Jasper, I whispered. Jason mouthed at me to shut up or we'd get into trouble. But I was already in trouble. Pete, Jasper's on your face, he said, forgetting about being quiet. Oh no, I whispered from the corner of my mouth. Don't let it sting you in the eye, he said. Oh yeah, thanks, Jason. That really helps. Jason Harker, came a call from across the playground. What have I said about talking after the bell has been rung? Don't do it, Jason said, freezing to the spot. Don't do it, Mrs. Spencer echoed. But miss, Pete's got one more word and it'll be Miss Carter's office for you. Jason glanced at me and gave me a look which seemed to say, I'm sorry, I tried, but what can I do? My hands are tied. You're on your own, mate.
Thank you, Paul. So, yeah, and again, without over-egging this, I guarantee that if you don't know where you've got no chance of guessing where that story is going. If you think you have, you pay 99p and you find out that you were wrong. Okay, so next up, Phil Olsen. Phil, are you there? I should explain, actually. So part of the process of putting this ebook together, sort of after the course had run, was that we threw it open so that the participants could get involved in the editing process. So we basically split the editing between myself and three of the authors, of which Phil was one. And in fact, the next three writers were all involved in the editing process as well. But maybe we could talk about that a bit later. But yeah, Phil, if you're there, do you want to...
I am. Hi. Yeah.
Hello.
Okay. Yeah. So my short story is called 2020 Vision, and like a couple of the others, it was partly inspired by the Robert Sherman story we looked at, and also last year's lockdown. So this story alternates paragraph by paragraph between diary entries from lockdown and then an increasingly paranoid protagonist sort of in between. So if I pause, I'm moving on to back and forth between the diary entries and the... So I'm going to start part way through and just give you a little taster. Okay, so I moved closer to the screen, zoomed in beyond the birdhouse on the pole. The image got a bit blurry as I kept tapping the magnifying glass, but it did look a bit like me. The top half of the face, that was, above the disposable mask. How did she even know what I looked like? I didn't have a profile picture on this site, none of us did, and my social media accounts were either set to friends only or they'd long since been deleted. Tuesday, 5th of May, 2020. News on the radio comes through about a goose making a nest in a planter on a quiet platform at York train station. Apparently, it has chucked out all the plants to make it just so and laid 4 eggs. I look back through some of her earlier photos, the ones she hadn't tagged me in. The images look the same, but there must have been some subtle differences if these really were different shots taken each day. I zoomed in past the bird box on the pole, out into the street where the man in the disposable mask was walking by. He was blurred because he was moving and blurred because he wasn't the focus of the photograph, so it was hard to hone in on. It wasn't me though. I mean, it wasn't the man who vaguely resembled me. He was different to the figure in the photos I was tagged in. So the photographs really were unique after all. Thursday, 7th of May, 2020. A cream-coloured skip arrives for next door and is dropped opposite the house. Builders throw in pieces of old plasterboard and lean a set of gloss white interior doors against the side. How many years have these doors been stationed down the hall from one another or across the landing? Now, gathered outside while the rest of us stay indoors, they can finally exchange tales of protecting the rest of the house from smoking ovens, witnessing the evolution of TV sitcoms, or enduring the slams of teenage tantrums. One builder returns to saw them in half and better fit them into the skip. Like, I was tagged in her photo again. I zoomed in, and sure enough, it was my doppelganger behind the blue mask. I might have questioned my movements, wondered if I'd walked down this terraced street if it wasn't for the fact that I didn't wear those blue single-use masks. It couldn't have been me. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't an anti-masker, far from it, but I wore cloth masks when I ventured out. Saturday, 9th of May, 2020. In the backyard, a tiny black and yellow spider runs around on the palm of my left hand. A money spider maybe, or one size bigger. It scales my index finger and then sits on the edge of my fingernail, having reached the peak. I wonder if it is considering burrowing underneath. I picture it crawling back down my finger, back towards my palm, except under the skin this time. I take it over to a chimney planter and it reluctantly makes the transfer from keratin to terracotta. It had to be Photoshop. Sorsha says hi, must have found an old profile picture of me on LinkedIn or something and decided to have some fun with her Adobe Creative Suite. She was baiting me and it was working. I commented under a most recent photograph of the planter through the bay window. So spooky, that really does look like me walking past. A reasonable man. Submit for approval. Approved. Thanks, it is you, hence tagging you, hence looking like you.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Phil. So right, we move on to our penultimate writer of the evening, Rob Price. Are you there, Rob?
Hi, really nice to be here. Thanks to Comma for organising this and to the other amazing writers in the collection. I'm just going to read a very short part from my story, The Folk from the Sea, which I think I really like the fact that it bookends it with Fear's one, which is also about the sea. And so that wasn't discussed between us, but I enjoy symmetry. Okay, this is very short. Nobody knew the changes taking place inside her skin. She could feel an anemone opening and closing inside her stomach, just as she opened and closed her own wide mouth in the mirror and gulped to see her larynx shift. Was her neck too wide? That seemed impossible to know. Mirrors can be liars. She examined her fingers and the webbing in between. Finish this sentence. On average. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. So, and again, Rob was one of our co-editors on the book, and our final writer was also one of the co-editors, Abby Moss. Abby, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. Yeah, so my story is called What Do You Write About? I didn't intend to write about the pandemic, but this story is partly about illness and sickness. And I was also thinking a lot about being a writer and sort of the ethics of writing about the people that we know, and writing about our own experiences. So that was kind of the inspiration for this story. I'm just going to read a short extract. Later, when she wrote about it, she wrote that on the first day, he stayed in bed until midday. The second day, he slept until late into the afternoon, and on the third day, he didn't get out of bed at all. He briefly rallied, she wrote, with an unexpected surge of energy one afternoon, but finally, she convinced herself that he had been unstoppable. The end coming on all at once, a fast and shocking thing that nobody could have seen coming. On their first date, she called herself a writer, feeling self-conscious and uncharacteristically shy. She'd waited for the usual question, the question everyone asked, which she hated. She couldn't answer it, not really, and that made her feel like a fraud. What do you write about? People would ask, tilting their head and waiting for some tidy, concise answer. But Ben sipped his beer and asked a different question. Do you write movies? He leaned forward onto his elbows, eager. When she told him, no, not movies, he sat back, swirled the foam around his glass, and asked her where she grew up. She decided to invite him to her place. Perhaps, she thought, as he kissed her sloppily halfway through the door to her flat, he was just what she needed right now. She dated too many Kerouac wannabes, and it never worked out. The way they breathed down her neck, limp roll-ups hanging from their lips, giving opaque feedback and using words like Kafkaesque. Perhaps someone uninterested would work out better. She didn't hide her writing, didn't need to. Ben's indifference persisted even after they moved in together, and her pages were constantly spread out over the dining table, typed and printed out and edited with red pen. She would always edit by hand, always in red, enjoying the drama, the ominousness of that color. She'd write forbidding and teacherly notes to herself, things like, you can do better than this. Then she'd look back at the carnage she'd wrought over her work with satisfaction. She was never more merciless than when she was writing. When he ate, he put his plate down on the table without clearing a space, bringing fork to mouth while he stared at his phone. She'd watch him laughing at videos on YouTube. A clip of a pelican trying to eat a live pigeon was one of his favorites. He found it hilarious. She'd observe him from across the flat, laughing and slurping instant ramen, and later she'd find translucent grease spots making little windows on her pages. Underlining a sentence, in the margin, she'd add another note to herself. Not ugly enough.
Brilliant. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so yeah, for the rest of the time, we're just going to have a bit of a Q&A with the contributors here. So if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that and put it to everybody. So I guess just the sort of first question to you all is, for context, I know that you are sort of at various points in terms of whether you've been published or kind of what your dealings with the short story have been. So kind of where were you all up to with that, and what was the appeal of a short story course for you from that point? Ben?
Well, I'm very new. I don't know whether I'm one of the least experienced on the course, but I'm trying not to be a bull in a china shop, which is a personal tendency when I get get passionate about something, a new art form. I'm very much trying to treat the next few years at the least in terms of as unofficial study. So I'm just kind of very new to it all and embracing all kinds of short stories, reading a lot, writing a lot, playing with flash fiction, and as a way of just finding my feet with different characters. So to come onto a formal course like this and study all the greats that we did was just very thrilling for me, and it's only kind of further lit the fire to try and get myself out there and get published. And seeing a few people on the course do so is just hugely invigorating and inspiring. So yeah, very, very early stages for me, but really just loving, and all the. It was the Comma City series, the Tokyo short stories series. That was one of the first collections that I picked up when I started to write fiction myself, and I recommend it to anyone. There's some fantastic stories in there.
Okay. And Paul, how about yourself?
Yeah, it was 2007 when I had this revelation that I was going to write a novel, and I spent about the next 5 years not writing a novel. when suddenly I realized maybe I should try a short story first. And I wrote this one story that I sent around to a few people, and it just got rejected and rejected. It didn't win competitions. And then I just continued to write more and more. And then last year, just after the pandemic started, I sent 2 of my stories to Green Teeth Press, and they accepted them both. And they were both published in early this year and in the summer this year, 2 of those. And the reason I came on the course, and I couldn't say this at the time because it was secret, but when they accepted my short stories, they also asked me to do an entire collection of short stories. And I just wanted to get a bit better for the process of that. I went back over some of my older ones that I'd written years ago and rewrote them with what I learned on the course, and shared some of them around with the WhatsApp group and some other chat groups with folks from the course, and people there have looked at them, and we've kind of worked on them together. And yeah, so that's going to be coming out sometime next year. I'm just about to start the editing process.
Brilliant, fantastic. Anybody else want to say where they were up to and why they did it?
Yeah. For me, I kind of hadn't really read many short stories, and then in 2019 I started my MA in creative writing, and I was writing a novel, and there were like 4 people in my writing workshop who were also writing short story collections. So it made me quite curious about short fiction. So I ended up buying quite a few collections, and then thinking, wouldn't it be great to actually finish a story for once? And I started up a bit of a WhatsApp group for a few people on my course, who we would sort of share, we would give each other inspirations each week. So we might give each other a setting, a phrase to include, and like an animal or something. And I tried flash fiction, and it was really fun. And then after I came to the end of my MA, I thought starting a proper course and learning how to do this properly would be a really nice segue out of, formal education, and into the real world. So yeah, it's been amazing. It's been so great to meet everyone and read people's works in progress, and it's really helped my imposter syndrome as well. I don't know if any of you guys found that. Yeah, it's been great.
Lots of nods. Okay. So Susan, yeah?
I was just going to say, one of the reasons I joined the course was because I was able to write flash fiction sort of under 500 words, and I was able to write a novel sort of 80,000 words, but I found the short story, that in between sort of 5,000 words sort of length, quite hard to do. So I think I've improved on that a little bit. And I also wanted to make some friends that were horror writers as well, because they're quite niche people, and I wanted to make more friends in that area, which was successful.
So just, we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but for anybody who wasn't on the course, yeah, we would sort of look at a particular story, a particular writer every week. So for those of you who were on the course, were there particular writers who you connected with, who fed into what you did, or maybe who you, I don't know, that had an unexpected effect on you in any way, or an influence?
Yeah, definitely. Can I take that? Yeah, like Robert Aitman's the man. Like, why isn't he more famous? I don't understand. like as soon as I read this, I was like, oh my god, I have to buy everything this man ever wrote. I think so I'd never heard of Aitman, although I now realize that I've consumed so many things that have been touched by his influence. And it was just this like really exciting thing of like reading him and realizing that this was like the key that would unlock like all these like other texts that I love. And I think like what I really enjoyed most was, I've said this before, but I just think that this idea that you just get involved in horrible situations out of being too polite to say no. It appealed to something in me that's probably the most English part of me.
I hope you don't feel like that about tonight. That's the only thing.
I feel like that about every single aspect of my life. I guess I'm just going along with it. Yeah.
Brilliant.
That's him.
Anybody else, Aikman or otherwise?
Yeah, I think I'm probably the same in a way, and it kind of links back to the first question, I suppose, as well, about reasons for doing the course. Is that although I've wrote short fiction for kind of 5 or 6 years successfully or otherwise, I don't actually read much short fiction. I'm a big King epic fan, so even his short fiction I don't really touch. I read everything that's massive doorstop books. So I was the same. Aikman was one of those that I'd never heard of, and just blew my mind, some of the stuff that was out there that I was completely missing by not just opening the spectrum for myself of what I could find. So I think it was his, and probably as well Wolf Alice by Angela Carter, which, although it was probably one of the weeks I struggled with the most, was a good exercise in challenging myself and seeing such a different style of writing and a different mix of genres.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, Ben?
Shirley Jackson blew me away. I'd read Haunting of Hill House, a novel, which was tremendous. But then coming into the exercise where we studied The Lottery, which is obviously a classic, I was at first very excited because I'd written a very short story of my own, which had a lot of symmetry with that. But then it wasn't so much that, but it was the springboard. I then went and, like I did with most authors, picked up a couple of collections, and just the sheer kind of banality in a lot of the short stories was just wonderful. And these stories that didn't really go anywhere, didn't have any epic moments as such. It was just these little moments in these very average lives, but she just wrote them compelling and had such a way of connecting you with those characters. And I just found that masterful. So I really loved her short story collections.
I should say that the 6 writers that we looked at were M.R. James, Shirley Jackson, Robert Aikman, Robert Shearman, Ramsey Campbell, and Angela Carter. Is that right? Is that the 6? Yeah. So anybody else have any thoughts on any of those?
I was going to say, I really loved the Angela Carter one. I went on to buy The Bloody Chamber, and I've just absolutely devoured all the stories in that book. It's just, I'm going to reread it again, I'm sure, very soon. I loved it.
What I loved about it in general was just how diverse everything we were reading was. What appealed to the course to me was, I've done short story courses before, but I've never done one that was specifically horror. And then a lot of what we were talking about was, well, what is horror? And I just found that really interesting, and seeing, how huge the genre actually can be was really interesting.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like the range of what counts as horror, whether it's kind of slightly unnerving, uncanny stuff, to the out and out horror. And there's a good mix of the classics with M.R. James and Shirley Jackson, and then the more contemporary stuff. So as I mentioned when I read mine was the influenced by Robert Shearman, with his story, which was the last one we did, I think. The Big Boys, Big Box of Tricks. And one of the things I love about that is the fact that the protagonist is kind of pretty unlikable. And that's one of the other great things that you can do with short stories, because I think with a novel, if you don't like the protagonist, you're stuck with them for 300 pages or whatever. But you can tolerate a sort of unlikable protagonist for a duration of a short story. So that was good fun.
I think for me, it was the Ramsey Campbell story that really stuck in my head. And that was partly because it was entirely set in somewhere that I've been.
That was Macintosh Willie, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a park in Liverpool that I've actually driven around and more than once, and I'm quite familiar with it. And it made me realise that I could use places I've been, even if I'm not setting them in like the town where I grew up or Manchester where I live now, you know, I can use those places as inspiration for my fictional towns and parks and villages and whatever else. And that's sort of really helped me just to take detail from what's around me.
That's something that's always fascinated me, the idea of the sort of strange and unearthly fetching up on your doorstep. Something else I wanted to ask about is that, you know, in some ways we've tried to avoid talking about the lockdown, and in other ways it's not avoidable. But, you know, some people have said that during the last 18 months have not felt remotely creative. So I find it very interesting to just see how people managed to create at this time. Did you find that, have you struggled to write? Did you find that this was an opportunity to, you know, to sit there for an hour, as it was, to do an exercise? Did that make you create?
I actually was more creative than I've been in 2.5 years during lockdown. I did another course prior to the Common Press one, and kind of gained a little group of writers that I still do an hour every Saturday morning. We do a little writing session where we just have a catch up and then write for a bit and just crack on our own. And yeah, I've started writing more and more recently, and I think part of that has been kind of the bonuses, I suppose, of working from home and not having to commute both ways and having to do more than you should, and allowing my brain that extra kind of couple of hours where I would be commuting or working extra to shut down and actually go, oh, okay, I can think about what I'm passionate about rather than everything else.
I guess that's it, isn't it? You know, everybody's different. Some people they've struggled to create, and for other people, you know, the last 18 months has created an opportunity to be creative like that, hasn't it? Has anybody else had those experiences?
Yeah, but I used to read and write on the train, like on the commute kind of thing. So I felt like the structure of my day started to just kind of blur. And actually part of the reason for signing up to the course, obviously I wanted to find out more about the genre. But it was also just that sort of like, right, I need deadlines, and I need, you know, if I'm going to get something finished, then I need to kind of pin some time to it. So that really helped.
I found the circumstance. I had a weird perfect storm because I became a twin parent 2 months before lockdown. So, you know, it's like either way you look at it, I wouldn't have been doing a lot anyway socially. And as it went, strangely enough, while I was completely exhausted, I also found the kind of 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night a good headspace creatively. So when I did get back to work, you know, some jobs, I should say I'm an illustrator in my day job, and projects got called off, you know, not in a disastrous way, but it meant that I had a little more free time. And a combination of that, and then people saying to me, oh, you won't be doing that when you're a dad, you know, you won't be writing them stories. It was like, I'm quite competitive by nature, and well, you know, with myself these days. And it kind of all came together to, you know, plus the bizarre circumstances, the fact that, you know, the start of the first lockdown, it almost felt like a snow day, you know, in a sense. People were talking a bit more outside the co-op or whatever else. And I just found, you know, I've got a very observational brain, so all of that stuff came together, and I, you know, because of the lack of free time, I started to just knock out these very short, punchy observations about the way people were behaving in, you know, domesticity in its fullest form. So I had a lot of fun with that, and it ended up becoming quite admittedly quite short, but my first fiction book called Isolation Watch. And you know, so it was interesting. It was almost like backs against the wall creativity, because I had these very limited windows to do it, sitting on the toilet or going on the dog walk, and, you know, writing in these unconventional circumstances. But so that was fascinating for me.
So in terms of like the finished book, this is your opportunity to pat each other on the back, okay? So having read the finished book, are there other stories by the other writers? Is there any stories that you just think, wow, I can't, that's, it doesn't have to be a favourite, no favourites here, but are there any other stories amongst yourselves where you think, wow, that's pretty good?
Libby's and Paul's, it's not favourites, or, you know, they're all fantastic, and the diversity is wonderful. But in terms of images that stayed in my head, I don't know whether it's the insect thing, but the moth okay, I'm not going to spoil it because it should be more of a teaser, but in Libby's story, there's a particular image that I don't think I'll ever forget, which is wonderful. And Paul's, his image, the way he painted the image of the schoolyard of that time really rang true with me, and therefore it really, I could picture the whole thing with disturbing clarity.
Anyone else got stories that struck them?
Yeah, there's a line in Abby's story that she read at the end, which said she was never more merciless than when she was writing, and I really aspire to that level of mercilessness and honesty, which I feel like there's something very brutal about that story, and I edited it, and there's this definite moment when I was editing it where I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to quit because I'm never gonna be this brutal.
That's interesting. So in terms of the editing, whether you were an editor or you weren't, how was that process? Again, if you kind of come into it from different levels, maybe that's something you have or haven't had before. Was that a useful process of having feedback and reworking things?
Yeah, it was really good fun. I mean, obviously we'd done quite a bit of the editing on the course because we'd been kind of giving each other feedback in the Slack group, which was obviously another one of the benefits of the course. So it felt like when we were doing the kind of final edit, it was just, sort of tidying up really. And yeah, I got to edit both of the C stories at the beginning and the end, and that was really nice, kind of seeing the differences, and then also kind of seeing kind of those themes that fit and run throughout, kind of thing.
Anyone else? Any thoughts on that?
I've loved being edited and criticised. It's just over time I've just come to see the inherent value of fresh eyes on your work of any creative form. But particularly as a newbie to writing, I'm a bit of a glutton for it, because otherwise, you know what it's like when you create your own work and there's only yourself overseeing it. You miss things and you don't get the opportunity to put it out to a broader spectrum of people. So, getting more experienced people looking at any art form for me is just hugely valuable. So I was very grateful of it.
I think there's a little bit of a kind of selfish element to editing someone else's work as well, though, because whenever you're commenting on someone else's work, it kind of gives you thoughts about your own as well. And because everyone on this course brought such different things and everyone kind of had such cool different ideas, it was just constantly kind of making me think, oh yeah, that's not something I would have thought to have done. And so when you're editing, you're kind of improving yourself as well at the same time, which is really nice.
So just as a final thing then, really, I'm bearing in mind that I'm not paid by Comma in this respect. I'm not here to do promotion, but having done the course, you've done it. This is basically the ebooks come out. That's the final stage of it. Would you say it's been a worthwhile experience for you? Did you get out of it what you wanted to get out of it?
Yeah, 100%. I loved it. It was the first of its, well, not the first. I've done a writing course before, but the first horror genre specific thing. And I really, I'm just a fan of horror films and freaky things and open-minded in that regard. And so it was just, I looked at it. It was a very accessible price point, and I just thought, well, why the hell not? The pandemic's killed social life, so why not do something cool like this? But that was, I got loads more than I bargained for. Just learning about classic stories and being introduced to new writers and meeting people who are at different points in their own writing careers. And, the benefits were manifold, but I would also just say that it was a very nice, tight, concise course that was, not too much homework, just the right amount to keep you thinking. And I would definitely recommend it, and have done to a number of people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the writing prompts were brilliant as well. I've kind of got so many just little bits of, a paragraph or a kind of little half-written page or something that I kind of know I'm going to come back to in the future, and that maybe might evolve into something else as well. So it's been really good in that way too.
The problem with that is I now can't excuse myself by saying, oh, I haven't got any ideas at the moment, because I've got 6 that are just sat there staring at me.
That's true. Yeah. And you have to pick one and not let it overtake everything else you're trying to do. Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, we're nearly out of time. So yeah, well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to all the writers for doing the course initially and for being involved. And yeah, thank you very much. And
Someone's got their hand up, Andy.
Oh yeah. Oh, John Deere. Yes, you have your hand up. Go on. Did you have a question?
Yes. How do I get hold of a copy of the ebook?
That's a very good question. It's available by you can get it from Amazon or you can get it direct from Comma's website.
What's it called again?
It's the book's called Strange
Abrasions.
Abrasions. Thank you. Yes, and yes, it's very worthwhile. Cheap at half the price. So yes, thank you very much to everybody. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, enjoy the book if you do go and read it. Thank you very much, everybody. Lovely to see you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, Andy.
Cheers, Andy.